ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Howard Blend, and welcome to Howard's Blend. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Pure Grade Supplements. If you're looking for supplements that are free of artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, and all active ingredients are clinically dosed, check out Pure Grade Supplements at puregradesupplements.com. Link will be in the description of the show. In this episode of Howard's Blend, well, oakley dokley, folks, welcome to for the time being, as much as possible, the new Batcave studio. This is the conference room of the apartment complex. It's got a nice conference table. You can spread everything out, and very comfy chairs. So as much as I'm able to, if nobody else is going to be using the conference room on the day that I'm going to record, I will come here to record. So what's on tap for today? We're going to be talking about the cholinergic system. Most of you now are probably asking, what the hell is a cholinergic system? Well, do not worry, I will explain that to you. I'll do my best to explain it in simple terms and then explain it that simple terms further. So this is the first episode in, at the moment, a 4-part series for this podcast. So the first episode, the one you're listening to or watching right now, is on the cholinergic system. The second episode is going to be on choline bitartrate. Third episode is going to be on CDP-choline or Citicoline, Citicoline. And the fourth one, last but definitely not least, is alpha GPC, alpha glycerylphosphorylcholine. So what's the purpose of this mini-series here? Well, one, I think it's interesting information. I'm a supplement company owner. I'm big into learning about supplement science. So I figured this would be good information to provide for you all. Second of all, even though this is a mini-series, this is part of the pre-workout supplement ingredient series. This could also fall into a nootropic supplement ingredient, but we haven't talked about nootropics yet, but it's an idea for future episodes. This could fall into both. And I do want to preface the information of this episode, and I've said this before on research-intensive topics. I am not a scientist. I am not a professional. I'm not a medical professional. I'm literally a dude that, well, other than today or other episodes, but all the research-intensive episodes I've recorded in my closet. So I really like this stuff. So I put my head down and research this information and then try to make heads or tails of it and then provide it to you all. So with that said, I do my best to get the information correct. All right. I'm not trying to make excuses for making any mistakes, but mistakes do happen. I get stuff wrong. And I am not against coming on here and admitting that I did stuff wrong. I've had episodes that were literally just correcting mistakes that I did in previous episodes. So if any of you all find a mistake with something I said, and you want to correct me on it, I will be the first one to come on here and say, oh, I got this wrong. John Doe in Cincinnati got the information right. So please correct me if the information is wrong, but I'm doing my best to make sure this information is correct. So all that out of the way. We got all the, well, I guess I do need to add this legal disclaimer. I am not recommending any form of treatment or any supplements that you all should take. Do not start or stop any medication based on the information provided in this podcast. Talk to a medical professional first before you do that. Please do so. It literally could mean life and death. So this is strictly just for informational purposes only. All right, so now finally, I believe all the legal mumbo jumbo is out of the way. We're going to jump right into it. I've got 3 pages of notes here. I'm going to do my best not to look at the notes, but I probably will once in a while because I forget stuff. It's part of getting old, people. Maybe I should take some choline supplements, kind of a clue as to what we're going to be talking about here. All right, cholinergic system. Try to give a simple definition. It is like an organization of nerve cells that use acetylcholine to facilitate the communication between them. So it's a simple term, but it's like, what the hell is he talking about? Acetylcholine, all stuff. We will touch on all of that. So I wanted to give a broad definition, and then now we're going to kind of narrow it down and be more specific what we're talking about. So to talk about cholinergic system, we're first going to talk about choline. Okay, wait a second, Howard. You said cholinergic, choline. You said acetylcholine, choline. More clues. So choline. It's basically, it's a vital nutrient that is involved in many, many, many different processes, whatever you want to call it, to the body. It's kind of going beyond the scope of the episode to go into too much detail on that. Just know it's a vital nutrient. It is high in egg yolks. It's high in meat. So animal products. If you're a vegan or vegetarian, it's also high, I believe, like in broccoli. It's also high in peanuts. Those are just a couple of examples. But a simple Google search will bring up good food sources of choline. You can also take it through choline supplementation. Hint, hint, hint. What I talked about in subsequent episodes, we're going to be focusing on choline bitartrate, CDP-choline. So you can also supplement with choline as well. So no excuse not to get choline because it's in animal sources and non-animal sources. So there are 3 benefits to choline that we're going to focus on. I should say we're going to list in this episode. We're going to really focus more on 2. The first one, which we're just going to touch on here briefly, and then I'm going to move on. It's liver health. So there's a great resource in the description of the show. It is a 17 to 19 part vlog, as well as there is a 17 to 19 part, I forgot if it's 17 or 19 part video series on the cholinergic system by Leo Rex. I believe his YouTube channel is Leo and Longevity. I will put a link in the show. He goes into a great detail on this topic. A lot of the information on the show came from that vlog. I read the vlog and watched the YouTube series. And so he's got like over 300 citations that he uses for that vlog and the YouTube. But in the very first part, he talks about how, I think it was in the 90s, and I believe the doctor's name was Buchman. I don't remember. I didn't really highlight it because it wasn't really important. Not that Dr. Buchman's work wasn't important. It's just it's not really vital to go into great detail for this episode. But this doctor discovered that patients that were fed through a feeding tube, so if they were in a coma, patients in a coma, if particular diseases prevented these patients from consuming food the normal way, down the esophagus, through the stomach, intestinal tract, etc., they had to be fed by a feeding tube. And the doctor discovered that patients that were being fed through feeding tube were developing, I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. So basically their liver was in big trouble. They were developing disease of the liver. And he discovered that if he provided choline through their feeding tube to these patients, that I think it was around a month, within a month, this non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or I think it's called NASH for short, cleared up. So with that, it was shown that choline has a role in the health of the liver. So it's vital that we consume choline. That's the first benefit. We're not going to cover that anymore because it gets away from the purpose of what this episode is about. So number 2, the second benefit of choline, and that is it can act as a methyl donor. More specifically, a metabolite of choline can act as a methyl donor. So what does that mean, methyl donor? What the hell does that mean, Howard? Well, to discuss that, we need to start off with what is a methyl group? What is that? What's a methyl group? It's essentially a molecule of carbon, one carbon atom, and 3 hydrogen atoms. That makes up a methyl group. And a methyl donor is regarding the process of what's called methylation. All right. So methylation in this context means the methyl group from one substance is being donated to another substance. All right, so what's the benefit of that? So in our bodies, there is a toxic amino acid called homocysteine that is produced. It is a normal process. It happens daily. And it occurs when the amino acid methionine is metabolized into the amino acid cysteine. So those of you who watched and or listened to the podcast Peas in a Pod, where I discussed the production and detail of pea protein, the production of pea protein, we talked about in one of the segments of that episode amino acids. And I listed kind of the essential and non-essential amino acids. Well, methionine is an essential amino acid. For those who didn't listen, well, shame on you, first of all, but still, we'll discuss it here. Essential amino acid means that we have to consume it. So whether it's eating quinoa that has some protein in it, vegan sources or vegetarian sources of protein, whether it's eating meat, cheese, milk, whatever, or Howard's Blend plant-based protein powder, which has amino acids as well. Basically, we need to consume sources of fuel or food or sustenance, whatever, that has methionine in it. Our body cannot make it. Conversely, non-essential amino acids, our body can make those. They can make those amino acids. Well, during the process of metabolizing methionine into cysteine, homocysteine is created. And as I said, homocysteine is a toxic amino acid. If there's a buildup of too much homocysteine, it can lead to things such as cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, so not good. Well, as I said, it's a normal process. It gets dangerous when high levels of homocysteine build up. Well, our body has a way to, for lack of a better term, neutralize or make inert the homocysteine. Now, reading through the research, there are 2 ways that the body can do that. There may be more. I just read about 2 ways. We're only going to focus on one of those because it relates to choline. And that is the process of methylation. And what that means is basically a methyl group is taken from one substance, we're going to talk about that in a minute, and it's given to homocysteine, and thus that turns homocysteine back into methionine, making it an amino acid so it's not harmful anymore. So to go into this process further, normally, from what I read, this process of methylation, so giving this methyl group to homocysteine to turn it into methionine, that is done via B vitamins. I believe it's B9 folate, a specific form of folate called methyl tetrahydrofolate. I think I got that right. Methyl tetrahydrofolate, MTHF. So with the assistance of an enzyme, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, and this is just a brief going over it. I was reading about it and it goes way into more detail, the whole process. But with the assistance of that enzyme, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. It actually takes a methyl group from methyl tetrahydrofolate and then provides it to homocysteine, and I believe vitamin B12. Let me look. Yes, I believe vitamin B12 is also assisting in that reaction. It'll convert homocysteine into methionine. Thus, again, it's non-toxic anymore. Well, there are a couple reasons why this process of using this form of vitamin B9 folate or methyl tetrahydrofolate is not, I'm trying to think of a word for it. It doesn't work too well. It's not very efficient. One is you don't consume a lot of B vitamins, so your diet is lacking in sources of B vitamins. For this, I think it's vitamin B9 we want to focus on, and the vitamin B12. I think there may be another B vitamin, but those are the ones I remember. And those are the ones I wrote down as well. So your diet could be low in that. Thus, there's not enough vitamin B9 and B12 in order to facilitate that reaction to remove the methyl group from vitamin B9. I'm not going to say the long word again. And then provide it to homocysteine. Another reason why, and it could be and or, another reason is there is a variant in the, pardon me one second. Shoulder was itching. I didn't want to have the scratching sound in the microphone. Another reason, again, this could be and or, a dog can have ticks and fleas, is a variant in the MTHFR gene, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase gene. So the actual enzyme that's a catalyst to that reaction. It could be that makes our bodies very inefficient at this conversion, this methylation process, I should say. And in fact, I am waiting right now for my results from 23andMe. I had that sent off for the genetic analysis. I believe one of the things they check is if you have the variant of that MTHFR gene. Well, what that means is, first, from what I read from it, you just need to consume more B vitamins. So to make up for the lack of efficiency in this methylation process. Well, our body can then, if you're lacking in B vitamins or you have this MTHFR gene variant, our body can rely on other substances for methylation. One is the metabolite of choline, which we're going to talk about here. I believe another one is creatine. We haven't talked about creatine yet. We will talk about that in the future episode. But creatine can act as a methyl donor. Now, when I say a metabolite of choline, that metabolite is what's called trimethylglycine, aka also known as betaine. Betaine is another popular pre-workout supplement ingredient, which we are going to discuss in a future episode. But betaine can actually act as the methyl donor to homocysteine to convert it into methionine. So that's a second benefit of choline. All right, so the third benefit, we're going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. There's a lot of information here. The third benefit of choline, and I'm sorry I'm going to be looking off because the GoPro's got this red light and it's like, I don't know, it's annoying me, so I'm going to look off this way. The third benefit of choline is with the production of acetylcholine. We talked about that at the beginning when we briefly gave a definition of the cholinergic system. Acetylcholine. What's acetylcholine? Well, there's some sources that I read and saw and listened to that said acetylcholine is not a neurotransmitter, it is a neuromodulator. And then other sources, of course, that said, well, it is a neurotransmitter. So this is what you run into when you do research-intensive stuff. You have conflicting sources of information. So I'm going to go with both. I'm going to go down the middle, and I'm going to try to use both definitions. So in our peripheral system, what I mean by that is in our skeletal muscles. So I'm flexing my bicep now, my huge 21-inch bicep. That's a skeletal muscle. In the smooth muscles, so the muscles in our capillaries and our arteries, that allow it to expand and contract, which we talked about that with citrulline malate as a vasodilator, or citrulline, I should say. Citrulline malate is something different, but citrulline. It's a great episode for Howard Blend on that. Please listen to that if you want information on citrulline. Cardiac muscle. So in our heart, it's the cardiac muscle. Acetylcholine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Okay, Howard, whoa, wait a second. What's an excitatory neurotransmitter? If you go back, it's been a while. I had a two-part series or 2-episode series on beta-alanine. That was the very first pre-workout supplement ingredient. And I believe I referenced in that its effect or possible effect with an E, on neurotransmitters. So in essence, just to kind of recap again, trying to make it as brief as possible, neurotransmitters. So we'll take in the brain, for example. There are neurons in the brain throughout the body. But in order for neurons to communicate with each other, neurotransmitters are needed. So I'm going to hold my fingers together. So I have my fingers maybe about, half an inch apart, my index fingers. Make sure I clip my fingernails so they look nice. I have my fingers about a half an inch apart from one another. So, dang it, I don't want to hit the cables. Each one of those fingers, my index fingers, is a neuron. I believe it's an axon, then goes to a dendrite. I may be wrong on that, but that's what I remember. Well, that half inch in between them, that's what's called the synapse. So the neurons aren't actually connected. So in order for a signal, it's actually like an electric signal, to go from one neuron to another, there needs to be neurotransmitters to kind of facilitate that movement, that communication. And the neurons are kept like right in the end. The neurotransmitters are kept like in the end of the neurons because that's where they're needed. They're only needed to facilitate that transfer. Well, what's an excitatory neurotransmitter? Well, excitatory means that it stimulates or increases the production and the activity of that neuron. So when the electric signal goes to the neurons, that's called the action potential. So an excitatory neurotransmitter increases that action potential. You could think of what's the adrenaline. When you have the proverbial saber-toothed tiger chasing, a caveman or whatever, you get that adrenaline rush. Your heartbeat increases. Your vision becomes very dialed in. Your hearing increases. Your senses become heightened because your body senses danger. And then you get faster, you get stronger, so you can get away from danger and protect yourself. Well, that's excitatory. GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. That is the primary, I believe it's the primary, inhibitory neurotransmitter. There are anti-anxiety supplements that you can take that have GABA in it. I believe some pre-workouts have GABA. That's a whole other story. Why would they put GABA in a pre-workout? The explanation that I've heard before actually makes sense. There are nootropics that have GABA in it. That is inhibitory. It's the opposite. It calms us down. It slows down the activity of the neurons. So that's what happens in the extremities. Now in the central nervous system, which is like our eyes, because our eyes are part of our brain, they're connected, our brain or spinal cord, acetylcholine is neuromodulatory, which means an increase or decrease or a change in the amount of acetylcholine or acetylcholine. I think it's a cholinergic tone, I think is the term for it. That's in regards to how much acetylcholine. If it's high tone, there's a lot of acetylcholine. Low tone, there's a low amount of acetylcholine. So this change in the amount of acetylcholine in the central nervous system affects the amount of other neurotransmitters. So an increase in acetylcholine, for example, could cause an increase in serotonin or a decrease in serotonin or whatever. So in the central nervous system, it's more neuromodulatory. Went over what acetylcholine is. Well, I should say this. Acetylcholine is vital for movement. I'm flexing my 21-inch bicep right now. Acetylcholine is needed for that. If there's no acetylcholine, I can't move. I can't breathe. I can't talk to you. All that, it's going to come back near the end of the episode. We're going to talk about that, what happens when the balance of acetylcholine is like messed up. So acetylcholine, how is it produced? So it's essentially choline, all right? So that's tying in what we talked about before, choline, and then you also have acetyl-CoA. Now, acetyl-CoA is produced in the brain either by glucose, if you're like an omnivore or vegetarian or vegan, whatever, or by ketones, if you're on a ketogenic diet, if you're a carnivore, whatever. So your brain could use either one of those. And I believe, I'll have to look because I forget, there's a laundry list of B vitamins involved in this chemical reaction. Yeah, here it is. So it's vitamins B1, thiamine, B2, riboflavin, B3, niacin, and B5, pantothenic acid. All those, along with glucose, again, if you're on a vegan, vegetarian, omnivore type diet, or ketones, if you're on a ketogenic carnivore diet, along with those B vitamins, is used to make acetyl-CoA. And then there's another enzyme that I forget the name, I don't have it in the notes. It's used, those two can combine together, you have acetylcholine. Now, where does acetylcholine come into play with regards to pre-workout supplements? This is another benefit or potential benefit of acetylcholine. Well, it can, I should say, enhance memory. All right. One of the resources I saw is actually a YouTube video says it can benefit what's called fear-based learning. So fear-based learning is something you learn out of fear, obviously. An example I thought of was when I was a network engineer and I would mess something up, take down a customer's network, hopefully not, not a resume generating event, which I have done that before, unfortunately, which did cause a resume generating event. That and other reasons. You mess something up, you make a mistake, and then you become afraid because you made that mistake, your fear. Well, you learn, the idea is you learn and don't do that again. That's an example of fear-based learning. Well, acetylcholine can help with that. I believe also what really is the focus with regards to pre-workout supplements is it can increase the activity of, there's a part of the brain or the nervous system that was mentioned in the Leo and Longevity vlog. Yes, the central executive network. Acetylcholine could increase the activity of this central executive network, and that's involved with things such as attention, decision-making, memory. So the thinking is, this leads into the subsequent episodes, which will focus on each of those three forms of choline individually, that if you increase the amount of choline that you're taking, in this case supplementation, pre-workout supplements, that you'll end up with a higher amount of acetylcholine, which means you can get this more activity from this central executive network, which means it increases attention, focus, working memory. And it makes sense. If you're taking a pre-workout and your plan is to go to the gym and you're going to squat 405, so you have a 45-pound bar with 3 wheels on either side. You want to have focus. You don't want to be thinking about, did I finish that report for work the other day? Or, is that girl going to text me back, whatever it is. No, you don't want to be thinking about that because you can get injured. You want to have focus. You want to focus exactly what you're doing, lifting that weight because you got a boatload of weight on your back. So that's a benefit of acetylcholine, but then choline supplementation with regards to pre-workout supplements. Also, this doesn't really relate to it. I mean, I guess it does, but it was kind of a fun fact that I was reading in the Leo Rex article Where did it go? Pardon me. Where did it go? Yes. So a high cholinergic tone. So remember when I said like a high choline tone, whatever, that means that there's a high amount of acetylcholine. High amounts of acetylcholine are necessary for us to enter into REM sleep, rapid eye movement, where we dream. And then the parts of sleep, the durations of sleep where we're not dreaming, the amount of acetylcholine goes down. So throughout our body, I was going to say something else, but throughout our body, there are receptors for acetylcholine. No different than there are receptors for insulin. There are receptors for adenosine. So I believe it was the episode where I went over how I control blood sugar. Again, I was going to say something else, but I think it's called How I Control Blood Sugar, whatever it is. I believe in that episode I talk about, and I drew the diagram, which I got wrong, which I admitted that, hey, I got part of that science wrong. When you consume something like an apple or whatever, that causes your blood sugar to go up. So as a reaction, our pancreas, the beta cells, create insulin. And the job of insulin is to go out, the glucose, so the sugar is going through the blood, it's going around the cells, whatever. Insulin attaches to a receptor on the membrane of the cell. And I gave the example, I think, a bicep cell. I mean, I got a lot of receptors in my biceps since they're 21-inch arms. They're 21-inch guns. So if it attaches to the receptor on that cell, so think of it as like a lock, a key lock. In this case, insulin is like a lock. Insulin is the key. The receptor on the cell membrane is the lock. So when insulin attaches to that receptor, it then signals the GSV, the GLUT4 storage vesicles, which have GLUT4. And this is where I got the science wrong. I said in the episode that GLUT4 leaves the storage vesicles and goes to the membrane. It's actually the whole storage vesicle itself moves up to the membrane, and then that allows more chemical processes, more than what's really needed, more than my knowledge. It allows the membrane to open up, and then glucose can come in to store as glycogen or to be used as energy in the mitochondria or outside of the mitochondria if it's glycolysis, etc. And the same thing with adenosine. We talked about in the caffeine episode. When we take in caffeine, how it keeps us awake is throughout the day, adenosine's building up. And the adenosine attaches to receptors on neurons in our brain. And then when it attaches to it, it causes this chemical process then that allows us to get tired. We get sleepy. Well, caffeine sits in that receptor where adenosine should go. It doesn't activate it because it doesn't fit quite properly, but it sits there and it blocks adenosine from attaching, and thus that chemical process that makes us tired doesn't take effect. So that's what keeps us awake when we consume caffeine, either through a pre-workout supplement, chocolate, tea, coffee, whatever. So it's the same thing here. There are receptors throughout our body that accept acetylcholine. Now, there are two broad categories of acetylcholine receptors. One is the muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. Muscarinic refers to muscarins, which I believe are like toxic mushrooms. So that's interesting. So what that means is those receptors accept muscarins. They will also accept acetylcholine. They accept some other substances, but in general, those two are accepted by the muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. The Leo Rex article went into describing the different types of receptors. We're not going to go into that. I wrote them down, but we're not going to go into that. The other broad category is nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Well, as the name implies, it's nicotine. So nicotine and acetylcholine will attach to those nicotinic acetylcholine receptors as well as other substances. So those are the two broad categories. Let me see where I left off on my notes here to make sure I'm in the order that I want to take it. Just 1 second. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to go with on that particular one. All right, sorry about that. I left the voice command on the GoPro, so I don't want to say the word. Yeah, you understand what I meant. I said the wrong word. All right, so we know about the two broad categories of acetylcholine receptors. There was some more things I want to say, but I think it kind of, again, it gets away from what we were supposed to be talking about in this episode, kind of the purpose of the episode. Something else I want to mention, this relates to the pre-workout supplements. We're going to be talking about, I'm going to mention the supplement here in a minute. We're going to talk about that in another episode, are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So what's acetylcholinesterase? Acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. What it does is I believe it takes off that acetyl-CoA. So it basically breaks it back up into acetyl-CoA and then choline. And I believe the choline can be reused again to make more acetylcholine. So acetylcholinesterase inhibitor prevents acetylcholinesterase from breaking down acetylcholine. Well, there are prescription medications that do that. There are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. There's also supplements that are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. One that is used in a ton of pre-workout supplements, which we will have an episode on, is huperzine A. It is a supplement that acts as a acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. And to go back to the prescription, the primary medication or form of treatment that is used for Alzheimer's patients is a acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. One of the trademark, lack of a better term, signs of Alzheimer's, it's almost at a moment there, of Alzheimer's is the deterioration of cholinergic neurons. So those neurons that accept acetylcholine, and we gave the two broad categories in the basal forebrain. So basal is like the bottom, forebrain's like in the front. So you can think of like bottom front of the brain. There's a deterioration of those neurons there. That's one of the hallmark signs of, or symptoms, I guess, or results of. All right, sorry about that again. I think the GoPro was overheating because I left it plugged into the power source. So I believe I left off with prescription acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. I think I already discussed where acetylcholinesterase inhibitors are a primary means of treatment for Alzheimer's because a sign or a symptom or whatever you want to call it of Alzheimer's disease is the deterioration of cholinergic neurons in the bottom front, the basal forebrain. And I've seen that firsthand. I've mentioned it before. My aunt and my uncle who Sam, my son, is named after, he had Alzheimer's. My aunt had Alzheimer's. And when they took medication, I don't know for sure, but I'm going on the limb. I'm assuming that they were given some form of acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. The difference was night and day. I mean, she could remember my name again. I mean, it's a horrible disease because there were days where she'd remember who I was, and then I go see her, and then she had no clue who I was. And it's a horrible disease to see how it affects people, and basically just makes them just a shell. They can't interact with anybody. It's a horrible disease. So those are two forms of acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. Well, to kind of go back to a macro view, there are two types of acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. There are temporary ones, what we just talked about. There's supplementation, huperzine A. There's prescription medication for Alzheimer's disease. That's an example. Those are temporary, so they inhibit the job of acetylcholinesterase on a temporary basis. Well, there's also permanent acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. An example of that is sarin gas. This is in the video and the vlog by Leo Rex. Interesting stuff. Sarin gas was actually invented, reading this vlog article, by the Nazis. And I believe the sarin, S-A-R-I-N, is the initials for the scientists who actually created the gas. Now, sarin gas was not used during World War II, but it was in the attacks on the Tokyo subway. I think it was 1995. I've seen the name of the cult that used it. I didn't want to try to pronounce it. I'm horrible with Japanese pronunciation. But I believe it was 1995, this Japanese cult, who the leader, I believe he was executed in Japan, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. They had this sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway, and it killed like at least a dozen people. So sarin is a permanent acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. So what that means is it stops permanently acetylcholinesterase from doing its job. Well, you might think I'm crazy. Oh, yeah, cars. And we're not going to break into that. You might think that, if an increase in acetylcholine can increase the activity of the central executive network to increase my memory and make me more alert, well, that's good then. Well, it's not good when it's permanent. It's going back to what I said, and I said this would come up again, is that acetylcholine is excitatory in our skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, cardiac muscles. So when you have this permanent inhibition of acetylcholinesterase doing its job, you have a toxic buildup of acetylcholine in the body. So essentially, from what I got from the article, if I read it right, what I understand is that the people that died from sarin gas in the Tokyo subway attacks, they asphyxiated, they choked to death because they had such a high level of acetylcholine building up because there's no acetylcholinesterase, it can't do its job, that they could not control the muscles of their throat. Literally, you can try to breathe, but the muscles are contracting and expanding uncontrollably. I assume probably their diaphragm didn't work properly as well. Diaphragm is the muscle needed to help us, breathe in and breathe out to expand and contract the lungs. If all that doesn't work, you choke to death. It's a horrible way to die. So I thought that was interesting that we have a thought, especially with the supplementation when it comes to supplement business, that if this amount works, more must be better. Well, no, that's not the case. There's a reason why there is a dose, a recommended dose, clinical dose, etc., for these supplements, is that they can actually affect you and affect us in affect with an A, this time it's a verb, affect us in ways that are beneficial, but if taken too much, it can be deadly. They can kill us. So I thought that was interesting. Let me see if I think we've got 1 point left and then we're done. This is actually going by faster than what I expected. We're just blowing through this stuff here, folks. A lot of this we don't need to go over. Okay. Last point that I want to bring up. I'm not really going to focus on dosage in this episode because we're saving that for the episodes on choline bitartrate, CDP-choline, and alpha-GPC. Give me 1 second because I did not label the page numbers on my notes, so I am not sure which one is which. I think it's this one. No, wait. This one. Yes, here we go. Now, there is a danger, a possible danger. I'm not trying to scare anybody into not eating their eggs or not eating meat or being careful with the amount of peanuts or whatever they have. There's a danger, I should say, possible danger with choline consumption. And that is the formation of TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. And I believe this was, if any of you are like Joe Rogan fans, when he had that UFC fighter who was a vegan and he was debating the other guy he had on, I forgot the other guy's name, who was, I guess, not really, I don't know if he was anti-vegan or not, but they had that debate. This was one of the topics that came up. I heard that on another show. This is one of the topics that came up, was the formation of TMAO from choline consumption. And I believe the UFC fighter was saying that, well, if you follow a vegan diet, that it's less of a chance for this substance to build up. So what is TMAO? So we consume choline, and I think it's L-carnitine as well does this. I'm not 100% sure. I think that's the case. Well, there's bacteria in our colon. Everybody's got bacteria in their colon. Well, there's some bacteria there that when we consume choline will produce a gas called TMA, trimethylamine. Now, TMA is harmless. It just happens from this bacteria, I guess, metabolizing choline, or the metabolites of choline. I guess you could say that the negative of TMA is it has a fish odor. And in fact, there are some people that get a high buildup of this TMA, this non-toxic gas, and they actually will have urine that smells like fish. So it's an interesting little point there. You got fish urine. Just another aside here. This is something I was reading on one of the resources, that if you take vitamin B2, it could reduce that odor. Don't know that. I think the article said there hasn't been any like peer-reviewed studies of that. It's just putting it out there. Maybe what they call anecdotal cases that vitamin B2 can reduce that fish odor of trimethylamine. What can occur is trimethylamine, as it, I guess, diffuses, because it's a gas, it diffuses through the intestines, the intestinal wall, that it can be metabolized into trimethylamine N oxide. And I was looking for my notes on where it is. Yeah, there's another enzyme, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I'm going to butcher that. But it becomes trimethylamine N oxide. Now, I guess a good thing about that is it no longer has that fish odor. The bad thing is that it is very toxic. It could be dangerous. It's been associated with kidney failure, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke. So all in all, not very good. I guess I'm not trying to scare people into not consuming choline or being very careful about choline. It's just take that into account. This is just my 2 cents. We go back to what I was just talking about, that a lot of anything can be bad for you. Just take that into account when trying to build your diet, and especially your choline supplementation, this TMAO. Just something to keep in mind. I'm not trying to scare anybody. And I believe that's it. Let me look at my notes again real quick, make sure I did not miss anything. There's actually a lot more that I could talk about, but I self-edited myself. That made sense, Howard. Which is unusual for me. And I just wanted to try to keep this as simple as possible. Let me make sure there's nothing that I missed. Yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything on it. So that's it, folks. Thanks for listening. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Howard's Blend. If you enjoyed the show, you find value in the content, then please, 2 things. First of all, tell a friend, tell a family member, tell an enemy. Anybody that you think might benefit from the show's content, spread the love, spread the knowledge of this show. I'm here to provide information to you all. So hopefully you can learn something. Another way you can support the show is on my website, howardsblend.com. There is an option to donate. Only donate whatever you can. If it's 50 cents, I greatly appreciate it. Donate whatever you can. If you have any questions, comments, cheers, jeers, again, like I said at the beginning, if Howard, nope, you got that science wrong, it's completely wrong, this is the way it is, let me know. I'm here to learn. So part of learning is I get stuff wrong, and I'm here, and I come back on here to correct the mistakes. So please feel free to hit me up. I can never get that right. I get that wrong almost every time. My contact information as well as where you can find me on social media, is in the description of the show. Well, that's it, folks. I have nothing else to say. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, take some B2 for my fish pee. Adios.